Coming up on River City Presents, we'll be discussing the 2022 general election cycle with McCracken County Commissioner Eddie Jones. Welcome to River City Presents. My name's Daniel Hurt. Today we'll be discussing the 2022 general election cycle. Nationally, they thought the red wave was going to happen, but it turned out to be a whimper. Democrats maintained the Senate and only lost the House of Representatives by a small margin. But in Kentucky, it was the red wave. Republicans dominated. Democrats lost seats in the legislature, which does not necessarily bode well for Governor Beshear next year. Joining me to talk about local politics is McCracken County Commissioner Eddie Jones. Welcome back.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Glad to have you here. This is the second time you've been back. You've become my post-election guy, which is a lot of fun. But what do you make of that red wave that didn't really happen nationally? You think Biden's just popular and we got the polls wrong? Imagine that.
Yeah, I think it's all a matter of how independents, and we'll hear that again and again over the next 2 years. It's what were the independents thinking, and this time they did not like Biden, but they did not want to give the Republicans the Senate.
Do you think it was something about the election denying folks, or do you think it was a matter of?
I think it's a host of things, but I think Mitch McConnell's right. There was a candidate quality issue in some of the states that we were running.
Yeah, that's something, because I remember there's a lot of Democrats sharing memes around saying that Mitch McConnell's wondering where it went wrong, but he really called it right. It was Rick Scott from Florida that said that we were on the right track. Yeah. He's actually correct in that.
Yeah, I think McConnell said back in August that he was concerned with candidate quality issues.
But it doesn't seem to be a problem here in Kentucky for the Republicans. In fact, they did very well, and Democrats lost more seats than they already had previously. There were some upsets in McCracken County. We can start there. But first, I want to know, why do you think so many offices in McCracken County are uncontested? None of the state legislators were contested. Richard Abraham and Jeff Parker had a primary. You had a general election. You were the only one with a general election in the fiscal court besides Judge Clymer with Gary Vanderboe. Why do you think so few people are running for office?
I think there's a general satisfaction for how things are going, and I think there's also, with everything having, I think Kentucky is well past the red wave. I think we are now in a red lake. So it's just very difficult for Democrats to win in Western Kentucky, and for so long Republicans would never primary each other because we were such the minority. That's changing. I saw a statistic this morning that I think there are now twice as many Republican primaries statewide as there were 6 years ago. It's interesting because,
back when Democrats were in power, it was oftentimes decided in the primary, and there was no general election. Now it's sort of become the reverse of that. Did the Clymer-Vanderboe race surprise you any, or do you think that mandate simply because of the projects and the stuff that you guys had worked on?
Yeah, I think there's a general satisfaction. Clearly, we get a Republican edge, and you can define that if you look at the difference between the straight ticket voting. Being a Republican just in straight tickets got you an extra 4,600 votes in McCracken County. So there's that edge. But then when you look at the non-straight ticket, Clymer still dominated about 70%, even in the
so regardless of straight ticket, it still would have gone in his favor?
Yes.
Do you think, though, generally it favors, because it's a red lake, as you described, you're just basically more likely to win if you're a Republican in Western Kentucky?
I think there are more people voting for me and Craig Clymer because we are Republican. I'd like to take credit for that 4,600, but I suspect it has a lot to do with Rand Paul, Mitch McConnell, and Jamie Comer.
As someone who's worked on Democratic campaigns, one of the troubles that you have recruiting candidates for office, and I think this is part of the reason I'm going to ask you if you agree, it's really hard when you have a legislature that's near 80-20 now, if I'm not mistaken, after this election, Republicans in the majority. It's really hard to convince someone to, hey, we want you to invest your time, money, and energy to run and be number 22 or 23 out of 100.
And then if you win, you go up there and you sit with the minority, and you don't get to really participate in the policy. So it wouldn't be a lot of fun to serve in a minority.
And the state Senate's even worse. I mean, I think the Democrats now are in single digits, and it's an awful joke, and I know some people would be mad at me for this, but I've often made the joke that the Democratic caucus in the Senate could meet at a Cracker Barrel table. But that's,
there's eight of them. You're
so,
right.
I mean, it's awful, and I mean, I would certainly vote for my Democratic candidates if they ran, but it's just very, very difficult. And but tell me a little bit about just, you were out campaigning. Talk about your campaign experience this year. You were challenged by Yolanda Johnson, Democratic candidate. Of course, this election cycle, as we know, you were successful. What case did you make out on the trail for the voters that you think was most responsive?
Yeah, I just simply told them what we had done. I mean, even in a pandemic, our economy during the last 4 years, we created 500 new jobs in McCracken County, and I think everybody feels comfortable that we're heading the right direction with our pitch for economic development. The sports tourism effort was very, very, very popular. We had the good fortune of applying for an airport terminal grant, getting that off the ground, if you will, and we'll open that terminal in April. I found a lot of people happy with that.
Can you expand on the terminal, what that's going to do for us in McCracken County?
Well, we get two things. We get a twofer in 2023. We get a new terminal and we get a new airline. On December 6th, we'll start flying.
It's my birthday.
Yeah. When I say we as a community, we'll start flying to Charlotte, North Carolina, a different hub than Chicago. We're pretty happy about the switch. The connections are good. More places on the planet that you can now get to from Paducah with a two-stop flight.
Wow, that's surprising. I just thought Chicago. You think of big airports, you think of Chicago, but there are more flights out of Charlotte.
Well, I don't know if there's more flights, but there'll be more places that
from Paducah, right?
From Paducah that we'll want to get to. For example, you'll be able to get to the Caribbean, 4 different places in the Caribbean. Leave Paducah, go to Charlotte, be in the Caribbean.
Wow, it's amazing.
Yeah.
So there's a lot more opportunities.
Also including Spain.
So a lot of international flights, and I have friends that travel to Europe, every couple of years, and that'll be something. When I mentioned, and I thought it was Charlotte, when I mentioned that, they were very happy that change had been made. So yeah. They'll be using that rather than driving to Nashville, which they had done in the past. But I know Judge Clymer always walked around with that little flyer board he had out, the little whiteboard on the accomplishments of the fiscal court. I was always amused by that.
I was always amazed at how fast he could get those accomplishments into 3 minutes, 3 minute speech. I couldn't do it.
You talked about the jail and you ran out of time, but he's just, all right, gang, we got the board here. But it's humbling experience, obviously, to be defeated, but it should also be humbling to be victorious. So I'm going to ask you, Yolanda had some concerns. Do you think one of the concerns she had was the fiscal court needed to pay more attention to the forgotten areas of the county, and she mentioned Southside. So what's something that you're going to do about that, or you're going to try to do? Well,
let me start saying I thought she ran a very good campaign. She worked hard. She was a very pleasant person. We were lucky to have her as a candidate. It's nice to have a campaign, because without a campaign you have no public conversation. And
there's some honor in being the loyal opposition, I have found as well.
Yeah. So you got to remember, cities are different than counties. Statutorily, we are different from counties. There are about 20 statutes that tell counties, you must do this. We're mentioned in the Constitution.
Yeah.
Cities could decide not to be cities tomorrow, not tomorrow, but they could next year. I mean, we experienced that with Lone Oak, remember?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, Lone Oak decided, we don't want to be a city anymore, and they just stopped. So counties can't do that, and so the types of things that counties do and the types of things that cities do, sometimes we see them as brothers and sisters. They're not. They're really not even cousins. A city does not have to contribute or fund or run a jail. We are required to do that.
Right.
There are 19 other things I could go into, but I don't want to bore your program with that. So, but back to your question of Southside. No, I think Yolanda is right. Southside does need more investment, and as a guy who lives in both the city and the county, I'm enthused that Buzz is back on the city commission, because the things that we're working, Fountain Avenue and Lower Town, I think would work in the South Side. We've got a plan that clearly we're happy with. Everyone's proud of Lowertown and Fountain Avenue.
Yeah, no question about that.
Take that same strategy. We just got off that mark. We decided, well, somewhere, I remember the public discussion, there was some thought, well, we'll do Frenchtown area. Well, we ended up never picking a town.
Yeah.
So Southside might be the place that they start. I hope they do. That's what cities should do.
Yeah, and you know, you talked about buzz, and I think if anybody can talk about the way that a city used to look, you know, it's he always talks about just look at Paducah at the turn of the century in 2000 and look at it now. Look how much it's changed from Fountain Avenue to the Carson Center even. I mean, it was a salvage yard before it was the Carson Center. And he's definitely someone who was part of all that and knows how to do it. So I guess, do you think that the addition of buzz on the city commission and the way that it shook out is going to bode well for relationship between the county and the city? Do you anticipate that being positive?
Oh, I do. I mean, you know, I know we occasionally spar. I don't think I spar, but I mean, there are issues that naturally create spars.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, honestly, we create this issue by statute. We've got a set of statutes that say, city, you can annex parts of the county, and you don't have to ask the county, and you get to take the money that the county was making in its budget, and you get to put it in your budget.
Yeah.
Well, that's. I'm not saying that's something that needs to be done away with, but it's a natural. When you set up rules like that, it then becomes those issues spill over into multitudes of other issues.
Sure.
And we're facing that now because, you know, we want to work together on improving 911.
Yeah, I was about to ask about that.
As a county commissioner, I think it's great. Let's do that. But that we're going to have to borrow money, which means we're going to have to make a payment, which means, would you please quit taking away my ability to make the payment?
That would be good, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
You know, and along with that and other things that you're going to work together on, something else Yolanda was concerned about, which was the athletic center and everything. So can you explain where we're at with that and why she doesn't need to be concerned, or why maybe there are concerns?
Well, you know, number one, I don't have a magic ball. I can't predict the future with certainty. What I can tell you is that three things happened that I think, which the comedian said, there's your sign. Three things happened during our term that told us that. One, we discovered and created a way to make another $1 million of revenue that can only be spent on sports tourism, and it's $1 million of revenue that you don't pay and I don't pay, but rather it's a cover charge for people who come visit our area. That's one thing that happened. Number two, a horse track decided to shut down and said, by the way, Judge Clymer, we hear you. We're going to give you this 60 perfect acres that is adjacent to Noble Park and to the county landfill and to Stuart Nelson Park. So that happened. And then after we made it through the pandemic, the federal government said, county, here's $13.5 million. One-time money. Use it wisely. And what do you do with one-time money? Well, you do things that will change the trajectory of your county. You don't want to end up hiring more people because you're not going to...
The big stuff.
Yeah. So this is that time. So you take that gift of property, $13.5 million, and the city then, at the same time, decided not to do the aquatic center, so they are able in a position to match that. They'd already borrowed that money. So now we've got $25 million of ready cash, ready to go into this project. We've got this $1 million of revenue that can pay the debt service for whatever it costs and above. I don't know exactly what it's going to cost yet. I just know that we've got a bank of money so that we can do it right. And what we do know about sports tourism is that what we saw during the pandemic is sports tourism didn't die off. In fact, it thrived. We had, you may have heard, we actually had issues of how to manage crowds at the Expo Center because of basketball games.
So there's, I mean, I guess my biggest concern with something like that personally is, you know, you're building something with the hope that's sort of the field of dreams. If you build it, they will come. Well, what's the promise that they will? It's a risk.
There certainly is a risk, and it's important to manage your market, build things that will make you different, and build things that can be, you know, a little different. So, which is why I think we're going to turf fields. Which, you know, the advantage of a turf field is that if a dad or mom is in St. Louis and they've got little Johnny or little Jane going to play in soccer on Paducah on Saturday, and it's Wednesday, and they're looking at the weather.
Yeah.
Well, if you don't have a turf field,
Yeah.
they're like, well, we may play, we may not. I don't know if we're going to go. Let's go to this other place that has a turf field. So we're going to be one of the communities with a lot of turf fields, so we'll be reliable with regard to planning. And you know, those same fields you'll be able to play baseball on, you'll be able to play softball on, and you'll be able to play soccer on.
And it's more reliable, and you're not having to, like, if it rains or something, or the climate's not right, then people cancel, and then they go home, and they're.
What I don't see in the future is I don't see parents suddenly saying, you know what, I am not going to put my kid in sports. I've had it with that. You know, I don't hear any parents saying that.
I don't see that. I agree. So you make a good case. But back to the election results. So that, you know, those were really the only contested races in the county. I mean, you already had Richard Abraham win in the primary,
Right.
and he'll be joining you all in the next year. But let's talk about some of the judicial races, which is really where the action was, it seemed like, this cycle.
Yeah.
First, we'll talk about district judge. So Jamie Mills, or James Mills, I know him as Jamie, he works in Commonwealth Attorney's office, Dan Bowe's office, and he challenged incumbent district judge Chris Hollowell. And they had quite a primary, and then they both, if you look at the numbers, expanded their vote tallies significantly, right?
Yeah.
What do you make of that election?
Yeah, it was kind of a sleepy primary. Nobody really jumped out, although Chris was the incumbent and had the edge, but Jamie really worked it hard. I would say generally we had 4 lawyers running for 2 positions of judges. I think we should be proud as a community. They all ran good races. We had 4 good lawyers running for those 2 positions.
And then on circuit judge, Joe Rourke, as a partner at the Bryant Law Center, he defeated Charles Walter, who also worked in the Commonwealth Attorney's office and is a partner at your law firm, or was a partner at your law firm. Yeah. What do you think, what do you make of that race? That was an open seat, right? So it was probably more competitive than...
You know, I think that was just pure who got out and, who knew the most people, who shook the most hands, because there was no real party affiliation with either one of those. Neither had run for office before. I think that was truly just the measure of the campaign.
Yeah. And both of them waged a solid race. I mean, I'll admit, for public disclosure, I worked for Joe Rourke's campaign, but Chuck and Joe both had signs everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, there was nobody lazy running for that job, that's for sure.
So the question I had prior to this interview was, what do you make of when you're a judge, when you're a partner at a law firm, you become a judge? What is the rules on recusing yourself or not working with former partners and things like that?
Well, I think that with regard to former partners, I think there is a length of time. I'm not an expert on that. I know if you have a permanent relationship, such as husband, wife, or brothers, which we could have had either one in this situation, then I don't think that situation goes away. I think, in all likelihood, depending on which lawyer you have, that may dictate. You may not get the draw of 2 judges between Tony Kitchens or Judge Rourke. You'll end up
with the one that you're not affiliated with. The other question I had was, what do you make of Mills and Walter? They have great name ID, so if they ever wanted to run for anything, now would be the time if they want to run for office. And I was impressed by both of them, and I think that if you're running against somebody that has maybe been appointed to a job or has never had an election yet, you've already got this name recognition, you've already got the literature design, which does take time, and you've got all these things already ready to go, apparatus of volunteers. You're already a step ahead than the incumbent.
That's true. If you're not out of energy,
right.
It does wear you down, and there's an emotional cost and a family cost and all those things. But if certainly their names are now something that lots more people know both Chuck Walter and Jamie Mills than they did 2 years ago.
So we'll see what happens with them. Let's get to the amendments now. So both of the amendments failed, and first we'll start with Amendment 1, which basically, if you want to explain it, essentially it also allowed the legislature to call special session and to set the calendar dates like the governor can do, right?
That's right. So the Kentucky Constitution is about 100 years old, a little more than 100 years old. And our legislature is a part-time legislature in guess it's in odd years they have short sessions of 60 days, and in even years they have long sessions of 90 days. And that's all we want them to do. But those are always in the spring. So in times like a pandemic, like we had, I think it was frustrating to them to not be able to call themselves back to Frankfurt to, have more meaningful discussions with the governor. They only have power when they're in session.
Right. I'm just very skeptical of it because it seems to me that it's partisan. And I'll ask you what you think, but I think that it just seems to me that it's the Republican legislature wanting to get an edge on Beshear. But I doubt that if the Republicans elect, say, a Cameron or a Quarles or whoever, if Beshear's unsuccessful next year, I don't see them wanting to share authority like that. But as we know, it also doesn't necessarily specify that the governor can't call a special session.
That's true. The governor still can. It was just basically going to make it so each could. That's the one amendment I thought both of them. I voted for both amendments, but that makes sense to me in 2022 to give both the legislative and the executive branch the power to call a special session.
Well, I understand, and one of the things I can always say about it is, we're friends in bipartisan ways because I voted against both of those amendments. So, but on to the second one, which was really the one that was the what I call the bigger one, which was about abortion. And would you care to explain what the amendment basically?
So the amendment basically said, we've got, I can't remember exactly, we got about 260 sections of our Kentucky Constitution. And what it basically said is none of the sections of the Constitution which come before this one should or could be interpreted to mean that somebody has a right to abortion or right to funding of abortion, which basically it was a preemptive strike to make sure that what happened in Roe v. Wade with the United States America's USA Constitution then couldn't happen with some words in the Kentucky Constitution.
Why do you think that they voted that down? Because if you look at the legislature, you look at the red lake, as I like that description. If you look at that and you see how Republican and frequently pro-life the candidates are, why do you think that the population voted it down?
Well, it was pretty close. When you look
54% or something like that.
52 for one and 53 against. So both lost by about 4 or 5%. Which in Kentucky, frankly, our process doesn't really make amending the Constitution easy. In my lifetime, we haven't amended it very often. We just don't like amending our Constitution. I mean, it took us forever to decide that we were actually going to amend the Constitution to allow a governor to run for a second term and a sheriff.
It was like 92.
When I graduated law school, I don't think you could run for a second term as a sheriff or as a governor. Well, it took us a long time to amend that. And, in recent time, Marcy's Law, it took us 2 times to get that amendment right because the Supreme Court said you got to say every word of the amendment on the ballot, which can make it harder. One of the things I noticed is this. When we were voting, when I went to vote, and there was a gentleman that I knew over to the right, and I knew he was a client of mine, very intelligent, run a very successful business. He was voting, and I noticed, he's been over there a long time. Oh, he's voting for me. But I went to the left, and I made, and it took a while because I like actually making. I don't like doing the straight party. I like making my choices, and so. But by the time I got in it, I noticed that my friend was still there and still voting. So I think the ballot took a long time, and I think in part those constitutional amendments were very wordy, and I could almost see people saying, "All right, now what's that saying again?" And they want to be careful.
I think read multiple times. Well, and the other thing that I thought about, it's like straight ticket balloting. If you hit straight ticket and go run it through the machine, you've skipped that vote. Right?
No, I think you'd still get to vote on the constitutional amendment.
I mean, yes, but I'm saying if you just circled in straight ticket and then ran it through the machine without paying attention to the other ballots, then you
that's right. That that's right. You'd have that danger of missing something.
And there's a lot of voters that I think, whether it's D or R, vote straight Republican or straight Democrat, and then just run it through the machine. And maybe it spits it back out and says you missed some. Maybe, I don't know. I've never done that.
I think if you just do that, then they decide you don't want to vote on those issues.
What do you think? And those are really all the big ones this year, but I think that this runs into, and we'll talk about this on another episode in detail if you'll come back.
Okay.
This does not bode well, these election results across the state. You know, Patty Minter lost in Bowling Green for her state legislative seat, which they thought was safe. Dorsey Ridley was defeated by about 2,500 votes in Henderson County against Brad Schneider. The Republican was victorious there. And those are
a
like,
Republican was elected sheriff of Henderson County.
Oh, I didn't know that. Yeah, you're a Henderson native originally. That's right. But and the question is, those are sort of Warren, and I have this pitch that's, you know, there's 21 counties you have to win a statewide election. That's what Beshear did in 19. It's a pretty good model. Warren and Henderson are bellwether counties, and if you can't carry those, that does not look good for a general election. I'm not saying that he can't. His recovery, work, the economy is growing in Kentucky. He's cutting all kinds of ribbons on manufacturing. So what do you think this election holds for next year? What do you think, this is a hint of what's to come? Or?
So if we look at the Bevin and Beshear race, 1.4 million people voted in that race. If we look at what happened just a couple weeks ago, 1.5 million voted. I suspect that we could have that election tomorrow and there'd be 700,000 people vote for the Democrat, there'd be 700,000 people vote for the Republican, and we're going to spend a year and a lot of money trying to convince 51,000 people to vote lean one way or the other.
That's right. It's just amazing to me, and there's a, you know, I think that I know a lot of people who've said that, you know, they're Republicans, but they're going to vote for Beshear because of the tornado and those disasters and things that happen. He's going to have a lot of bipartisan support next year. And I think Ryan Quarles wisely stated at the Marshall County Bean Dinner or the Marshall County Republican Dinner that he would be a force to be reckoned with, even though things may look up for Republicans.
You know, I practiced law. I had a case with Governor Beshear back when he and I both were younger lawyers.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, the truth is he's a nice guy.
Yeah.
You know, he and I disagree on many principles, but he is a nice guy. And maybe I'm not supposed to say that. But in Kentucky, I think what the nation will turn to us, and I suspect we will have two pretty nice people running against each other, really talking about ideas, which might be refreshing for the nation.
One hopes. Yeah. Well, we're out of time, but Eddie, I want to thank you for coming on as always, my friend. It's always a pleasure having you.
Okay.
Hopefully you'll come back and talk 2023 when it gets closer, if you'd like to do that.
Be happy to.
That was my guest, Eddie Jones, McCracken County Commissioner. We discussed the 2022 election cycle. Make sure you vote next election. Make sure you vote in all the elections. Hope you'll join us next time. Thanks.